Welcome, everybody. My name is Rachel Mills, and I work with the Louisiana State Bar Association. And we are here today as part of our Law Talk virtual workshop series. Today's Law Talks is on disability awareness and the power of inclusion. We have an attorney, Melanie Bray, who's with Disability Rights Louisiana, presenting with us here today. Let's see, and Melody, do you mind sharing the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Let's see if we'll go to the next slide. So before getting started, I need to go over a few important reminders. First, this presentation is being live streamed. Questions will be taken at the end if time permits and answered live. If you're watching at a library, you may walk up to the computer to ask or submit to the library staff your question. If you're watching via Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A section. If you're watching via Facebook, please submit questions in the comment sections. Please always note that comments are public and accessible by anyone during and after the presentation is over. And if we can go to the next slide, great. So please also note that this information provided in this presentation does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all information, content, and materials are for general information purposes only. No viewer of this video should act or refrain from acting based on information provided in this presentation without first seeking legal advice from counsel in the relevant jurisdiction. If you need assistance finding help in Louisiana, please go to the LSBA's Find Legal Help page. Further, the LSBA's inclusion of a program is not to be deemed a statement or an endorsement of the views expressed therein by the LSBA or any members of the LSBA. Speakers on LSBA programs were carefully selected for their knowledge, but neither the LSBA nor the speaker warrant that the presentation or materials were free of errors or will continue to be accurate. Statements in the presentations and the materials should be verified before relying on them. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect opinions of the LSBA, its section, or committees. Views expressed are those of the authors and contributors only. And if we can go to the next slide. So today, as we mentioned, our presenter is Melanie Bray. She's an attorney with Disability Rights Louisiana. She's actually the Director of Legal Programs and Advocacy. Disability Rights Louisiana is a nonprofit law firm and the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Louisiana, serving individuals with disabilities throughout the state. Ms. Bray works on a variety of cases, including Medicaid waiver eligibility, provision of Medicaid services, advocating for autonomy and challenging interdictions when requested, or advocating for a less restrictive option, such as supported decision-making. She's also working on a few major class action cases, one pertaining to the treatment of prisoners with mental illness. She successfully represented people with disabilities in administrative hearings, state court, federal court, and class action litigation. Ms. Bray is a graduate of Loyola New Orleans College of Law and is admitted to practice in the state of Louisiana, including the district federal courts and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Thank you so much for being here today, Melanie, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. All right, so we're going to get started. First, we're going to talk about DRLA. So let's get to know DRLA a little bit.
All people deserve basic human rights. That's why Congress created a system of protection and advocacy agencies, also known as P&As, to protect and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, because in the past, they have not been treated equally. For most of the 20th century, the phrase out of sight, out of mind was more than just a popular saying. It was the means for dealing with an unwanted segment of the population. People with disabilities were either segregated from society, locked away in institutions, or remained isolated at home with absolutely no services, not even an education. They were abused, neglected, forgotten. Then, in 1973, ABC News cameras exposed the filthy living conditions and poor treatment inside Staten Island's Willowbrook School, which housed people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. It shocked the nation.
The doctor had warned me that it would be bad, horrible.
Finally, in 1975, Congress acted. They mandated that every U.S. state and territory have an official protection and advocacy agency. PNAs go by many names, but their mission is the same: to protect and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. Together, the PNAs form the National Disability Rights Network, taking on issues affecting people with all kinds of disabilities. No other organizations have the sweeping access authority that PNAs have. They go anywhere services for people with disabilities are provided, from schools to hospitals to prisons and jails, to monitor conditions and listen to concerns. They make sure people with disabilities are treated equally, with dignity and respect, and never have to face the same kind of mistreatment they saw at Willowbrook. PNAs ask the public for input on which issues to take on in their communities. PNAs can fight against abuse and neglect in residential services, to end exploitation at work, for fair treatment in the criminal justice system, for equal access to public education and voting, for accessible communities and services and assistive technologies, and countless other issues. That's the protection and advocacy system. Click here to find the PNA for your state or territory, and subscribe for more videos from the PNA network at Rooted in Rights.
Very good. So that's a general overview about PNA system and what DRLA is generally. DRLA's mission is to advocate for the human and legal rights of all children, adults, and seniors with disabilities. Our work aims to empower the disability community to live an integrated life free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And as part of that, we not only provide direct representation, but we also educate, and we also provide resources and information to empower individuals to be stronger advocates on their own behalf. All of DRLA's clients are Louisiana residents with disabilities, regardless of income. Income is not a factor for our services. It includes physical disabilities, mental health issues, behavioral, intellectual, and traumatic brain injury disabilities. Basically, all disabilities. It also includes individuals who are older adults who may be experiencing disabilities that are onset later in life. It includes all ages. We have no limits on one end or another. We represent very small children and we represent older adults. So at a glance, DRLA's core services include information and referral. So this is a really large portion of what we do is providing information and referrals to callers to either better advocate for themselves or to put them on the path to receive services from appropriate agencies or entities. We have our client advocacy programs that work directly with individuals to assist in a variety of ways, most particularly assisting individuals who are interested in working to overcome whatever barriers they may be facing to be able to work, whether that's a modification or just guidance with getting into the workforce. They do a lot of work in those areas. We provide legal assistance. We have a legal team that provides both individual representation and also we're able to take on the larger issues, the larger class action systemic impact litigation. We do the systemic advocacy, which is the impact litigation. We have currently 6 lawsuits, systemic lawsuits that are ongoing, dealing with a variety of issues from children not receiving mental health services, children not receiving specialized nursing care in homes, children not having access to ABA therapy or the evaluations to qualify them to receive ABA therapy. We have a prison in North Louisiana for not providing mental health care. And then we have the issue of individuals who are in jails who are supposed to be transferred to the state mental health hospital because they've either been found in need of competency restoration or they've been found irrestorably incompetent, or they've been found not guilty by reason of insanity, and they're no longer supposed to be in the jail setting. And then there's just a delay in them transferring from the jail into the state mental health hospital. And then we have another case that we've been assisting with the implementation of for individuals with mental illness receiving services in the community setting rather than placement in unnecessary placement in a nursing home. Another core service that we do is outreach and training. That's what we're here today to do. We try to, it goes back also with enabling individuals with disabilities to become stronger advocates, either for themselves or for family and loved ones. We do a lot of outreach and training. We also do a lot of outreach and training for lawyers and judges and medical professionals and any other professionals, really, to educate them about disabilities and people with disabilities and how the work that they do may impact the disability community. We do legislative information and education. We have a whole policy team that keeps an eye on new legislation as it comes up to help educate policymakers about the impact that new laws could have on the disability community. We try to educate them when there's something of concern that could have an maybe unintended negative impact on people with disabilities. We try to educate them about that so that they can have that consideration in mind while still trying to meet the goal of the piece of legislation. We also do investigations into allegations of abuse and neglect. Now, those can be in a facility, those can be done by a state agency in the community setting. We do a variety of investigations. Also with that, we do monitoring of facilities. So basically we are able to go into any congregate setting where people with disabilities are housed to ensure that they are not being abused, neglected, or exploited, and that they're receiving the services that they're supposed to be receiving. So we do that on a regular basis with the congregate settings around the state of Louisiana. So at a glance, DRLA staff. Currently, we have a team of 7 lawyers. We have 1 legal assistant, 3 intake specialists, 3 FAIR advocates, 2 SILAB advocates, 11 ombudsmen that are around the state and go into the intermediate care facilities for people with developmental disabilities, 7 investigative advocates that work with our representative payee program, 2 CAP advocates, 3 WIPA advocates, and 3 policy advocates. This is the team of humans that is taking care of the requests for assistance that come to Disability Rights Louisiana statewide. So very small, but very mighty team of people. And I've included here the different ways that people can get in touch with Disability Rights Louisiana. We do phone intakes. We have a general info email address. You can also go to our website, and through our website, we have an online intake form as well. So let's start by talking about disability rights. What does that mean? What are we talking about when we say disability rights? Some of the laws that provide rights specifically for people with disabilities include the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the Americans with Disabilities Act it's not that old, right? It's only from 1990. It's a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. The ADA also provides affirmative obligations to state agencies and state facilities to be accessible to people with disabilities. And we're going to talk about accessibility in a little bit. But essentially, it puts an affirmative obligation on state agencies to say, you have to be accessible to all people, and that includes people with disability. And then it provides a course of action for people with disabilities if they've been discriminated against, or if they need some kind of a modification or an accommodation or something to either physically access a space or to access a program. There's a vehicle that they can make that request, and it gives them a tool that they can take to the agency to say, you have to do this because you have an obligation. Additionally, there's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. There is a handout that we have. It is available on our website that just kind of gives an overview about what 504 is, what it means, and what it does. 504 is a national law, it's federal law, that protects qualified individuals from discrimination based on their disability. And Section 504 applies to any agency or program that receives federal funding. So if they receive any kind of federal funding whatsoever, 504 applies to them, and they're not permitted to discriminate based on disability, which means if the agency can't come and say, you aren't permitted to participate in this program because you use a wheelchair, or we don't want to provide you with this service because you've been diagnosed with autism. They're not permitted to say that under the law. And Section 504 gives people with disabilities the right to challenge it. So when they face discrimination or they face denial of reasonable accommodation or modification to be able to access a program or service, the ADA and Section 504 give people the right to challenge those things in court. There's a third kind of bucket of rights that's created for people with disabilities, and that's commonly referred to just as Olmstead. So Olmstead is a lawsuit that was filed in the 90s. It went up all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It holds that people with disabilities should be in the least restrictive setting possible and receive appropriate services in a home and community-based setting when appropriate and when desired. So what this is applied to is all facets of everything, right? Where people with disabilities are involved. So this could mean, so the original case was brought because there were two ladies who were in a mental health facility and they wanted to get out. They wanted to go back and live in the community. And at the time they were told you can't because you have a mental health diagnosis, you have a mental illness and you're not allowed. Well, they thought that that was unfair and they thought that that was unreasonable and they thought that they could live in the community. So they filed this lawsuit and that went all the way up. So the outcome of this gave them the right to be able to choose to live in a less restrictive setting than a mental health institution, right? And receive services in the community setting that they needed. So for those two ladies, what that meant is they got outpatient mental health care, but they got to live in the community. This is now, Olmstead is applied to a variety of circumstances. It can be applied in a school setting that children with disabilities are permitted to be in the least restrictive setting possible while receiving the scope of services that are appropriate that they need. It applies to older adults who don't want to live in a nursing home, who want to stay in their home, but receive services while they're in their home. Probably the most recognizable outcome of Olmstead are the requirements for each state to create what's called an Olmstead plan. In the state of Louisiana, what that looks like is the Developmental Disability Waiver System. So the DD waiver system, like the New Opportunities Waiver, the Residential Opportunities Waiver, the Children's Choice Waiver, all of those waivers to Medicaid provide individuals with developmental disabilities services in a home and community-based setting. And the creation of that whole system is the result of Olmstead. So Olmstead gave the state these tools to be able to create these systems to ensure that people can still receive services, but live in a setting that they choose to be in. So let's talk about disability awareness. And I have another very short video to help out with this.
Animated text and graphics narrator. At Rooted in Rights, our videos are about people with disabilities. But that phrase means different things to different people, because everyone defines disabilities differently. Sometimes people are put into categories. People can have physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities, deafness and hearing impairments, blindness and vision impairments, symptoms or effects from a chronic condition, mental illness and traumatic brain injury, and that just scratches the surface. And some people don't identify as having disabilities at all. And sometimes having a disability is less about how different you are and more about how differently other people treat you. Interview subjects appear on screen. Carolyn Russo.
Although disabilities can set certain limitations, the biggest limitation is attitudes and prejudice.
Jesus Martinez.
People who have mental illness or have been diagnosed been portrayed very negatively and very poorly in the media.
Eric Mathis.
Just like anyone else, human beings. I don't want to be perfect, but I want to be a person where I have a voice.
Narrator. Too often, people only focus on the disability. Maybe that's the problem with this whole video. We've been defining disabilities the whole time, when all we needed to do is define people. People come in all shapes and sizes and abilities. No categories necessary. Find more videos at Rooted in Rights. Rooted in Rights Load. Disability rights are human rights. Subscribe for more videos.
So let's talk a little bit about disability etiquette. So can be challenging sometimes when talking about disabilities and people with disabilities to know what the most appropriate way to discuss them is, right? The fact is, almost everyone is going to experience some kind of impairment or disability as individuals or in relationships with friends or family. 1 in 4 people have a disability, and that's a lot of people, right? So it might not be a visible disability. It might be what's referred to as a hidden disability. But people have them, and people have them. You should always ask questions directly to the person with a disability if you're unsure about anything. Always defer to what the individual wants, right? But you speak and act in the same manner as you would for anyone else. You should never correct a person with a disability when they're referring to themselves, right? Some people, just like any other people, right? They choose how they want to self-identify, right? So while we advocate for person first language as being the most appropriate, some people with disabilities choose to identify as the disability first. So people first language means you talk about the human person before the disability. So you say people with disabilities instead of disabled people, or you'll say a person with cerebral palsy rather than, the cerebral palsy boy or man or whatever. Some terms are patronizing and should be avoided. Referring to people with disabilities as special, handicapped, right? Handicapped is a hard one because we have labeled objects as handicap something. So the handicap parking, handicap bathroom, handicapped entrance. We should use people first. So or different language like accessible. So accessible parking, the accessible entrance, the accessible bathrooms. Challenged is a antiquated term that has commonly been used to describe people with disabilities in a derogatory manner. Special needs is another hard one because special needs is also a term that has been used not only by the general population talking about people with disabilities, but also in the law and in medical contexts, right? I mean, there's even as of today, there's a special needs trust, right? So special needs is a difficult phrase for us to get away from. The same thing with mental retardation. Mental retardation has been historically used as the medical terminology to describe people with developmental or intellectual impairments. The reality is that it really isn't very descriptive, right? It doesn't really tell you what the diagnosis. It's not an actual diagnosis anymore. It's not a phrase that current medical professionals use, but in a lot of historical documents and in the law, it will still refer to mental retardation. So we've been working on getting away from that language and again referring to it as the more appropriately described terminology, whether that's a developmental disability, intellectual impairment, autism, the other specific diagnosis. And also the anything. Anytime that you're describing a group of people as the anything, like the disabled, is really it's very patronizing and it's very derogatory and it creates this idea of them being an other, and it really should just be avoided, right? And that goes beyond people with disabilities, and it's really just good life advice referring to any group of human beings as the anything is usually not a positive way to describe that group of humans and should be avoided. So I've put together this little chart. We have this little chart with some of the more common problematic terms, what that's intended to mean, and then some alternatives. So again, we go for the disabled or the handicapped, right? It's intended to be describing people with disabilities. And instead you just say people with disabilities, right? They are people first who have disabilities. And again, here we are talking about with the handicapped entrance, parking spot, bathroom, whatever it is, accessible to people with disabilities is what you're trying to say. So you just say the accessible entrance, the accessible parking, the accessible bathroom. Referring to people with disabilities as being a victim of or suffering from or afflicted with, when what you're trying to say is the person has a disability or has an impairment, you just say a person with, a person diagnosed with, a person diagnosed with autism, a person diagnosed with schizophrenia, a person with cerebral palsy. The people with disabilities aren't suffering from or the victim of anything. They're people who have a disability, who have a diagnosis that requires them to have needs for additional services or for things to be done a little differently. And then there's just some other terms here that are listed that have been historically used in a derogatory manner with the intention of being hurtful. So like saying, crazy or insane, anytime you're referring to a person, it can be offensive to people who've been diagnosed with mental health conditions. So it's really just about being mindful and thinking about people like they're people and referring to them as people before anything else. So let's talk about overcoming some barriers to accessibility. We've talked about accessibility a bit. So what is accessibility? Well, you might think of things like Braille on bathroom signs or ramps instead of stairs or the accessible parking spaces in bathroom stalls. But accessibility is much, much more than design elements, right? It's much, much more than a modification to a physical space. The ADA, which again, only 1990 was that passed, requires state and local governments, organizations, and most businesses that are open to the public to make their programs, goods, and services accessible to people with disabilities. So that includes completing the readily achievable barrier removal. So that's the physical barriers that can be altered or amended. So instead of stairs, having a ramp, or instead of having a narrow doorway, broadening it so that it's wide enough to accommodate a wheelchair. But also providing reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities when they need them. Many public spaces continue to have barriers to accessibility despite the existence of the ADA. So some physical accessibility barriers. They're structural or environmental obstacles that may prevent or limit access and mobility for people with disabilities. So think about, it could include having doorways that are too narrow, stairs without a ramp or without an alternative entrance, inaccessible bathrooms that are too small or the stalls are too small or the pathways aren't wide enough. Having high counters or high shelves so that maybe an individual who uses a wheelchair is unable to reach. Having a lack of accessible parking is often a problem, right? Poor lighting. that can impair individuals who have low vision from being able to navigate through a space. Uneven surfaces, inadequate signage is another, big physical barrier issue, right? If there is, say there is a ramp instead of stairs, but there's no sign to indicate that the ramp is there, that inhibits the individual with a disability from taking advantage of an accommodation that has been put in place. A lack of automatic doors is a big issue. And then just objects that create a barrier to passageways. So maybe there's a big planter that is in the way and narrows a walking path that would have otherwise been accessible. And the list goes on, right? A physical barrier could be any number of things. And it also could be something that is more fact intensive to an individual than a broad issue like stairs and a ramp. Speaking of, if you do stairs versus a wheelchair, who wins? No one. So ramps can be either permanent or temporary, right? Either a permanent or a temporary ramp is a good option as long as it meets ADA guidelines, is safe, and is effective to allow access. So this comes up very frequently in the city of New Orleans because so much of the city is historic, right? And so they don't have, they're exempted from obligations to do complete and total renovations and remodels, to remove stairs and create ramps or things like that. But a workaround is to get a temporary ramp. There's a restaurant that is down on Magazine Street that was previously inaccessible to wheelchair users because there were 2 steps to get in and out of the restaurant. And so we had, contacted the owners of the restaurant and said, hey, this is an issue. What can we do about it? One of their solutions was that they just had staff that worked in the back of the kitchen come out and lift the wheelchair up and carry it the 2 steps up into the building. And that's just unsafe for everyone, right? The staff in the restaurant could be injured, and then that could create a whole separate issue for the restaurant, a whole different set of liabilities, right? If they, God forbid, dropped the individual in the wheelchair, that could result in an injury to the individual. So we talked with them and we explained to them what their options were. And we helped them navigate the process of identifying an ADA safe and an ADA passing temporary ramp that's removable. So they purchased one and now they have it available at the restaurant. They can bring it out and put it out when it's needed for the individual to gain access to either come or go. And then it folds up and it can be stowed behind the hostess stand. So it was a very simple and very straightforward solution to really enable individuals with disabilities to get access to the benefit of enjoying the restaurant. Inaccessible medical equipment is also a huge barrier to physical accessibility that is very often overlooked, right? So if you think about something like a mammography machine, right? Any women that have ever had to go for a mammogram know that you walk up to this giant machine and you have to stand in front of it while they manipulate the device and do the scanning. Well, for an individual who's not able to stand, currently in most situations, they're not able to get that testing done, which means that they're not able to receive that very necessary screening for breast cancer, which inhibits their ability to provide adequate care for themselves, right? So it's things like that that are just now starting to be a consideration for medical providers and hospitals to ensure that they're taking accessibility needs under consideration and to be able to have an alternative or to upgrade the machines and equipment that they have to be able to provide those services to individuals with disabilities as well. So then let's talk about programmatic accessibility. And what does that mean? So programmatic accessibility means ensuring that there's no barriers to an inclusion in an organization's policies, practices, and communications. So removing barriers such as communication barriers or sensory barriers, right? So that could mean for individuals with visual impairments, maybe they need material printed in Braille, right? Maybe the individual needs someone to review documents at the time that they have to sign something for someone, right? Maybe the accommodation that an individual might need is they get to bring another person along with them to help read the document and assist them with filling paperwork out. Knowing what the best option is always to ask, right? So whether that's, someone needs to be able to provide an accommodation to you, they should ask you. If you need an accommodation, speak up. Speak up and say something. Say, hey, listen, I have this need. This is what would help me overcome that need. I have difficulty seeing. It would help me to be able to navigate this process to have someone else here with me. It would help me to navigate this process to have, if I could have this in Braille. For auditory impairments, maybe an ASL interpreter needs to be brought in and made available. Individuals with hearing impairments that have gone to doctor's offices, they need an ASL interpreter to be made available during a doctor's visit, whether that's an in-person, another human that's in the room with them, or whether that's over the video technology to have an interpreter available online, or another accommodation that might be sufficient. That's an obligation of the provider to provide that so the individual can meaningfully participate in whatever it is the activity is, right? Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's maybe you're going to a concert, or maybe you're going to a play or a Broadway show or something, and you want to be able, you have a hearing impairment and you want to be able to enjoy whatever it is that you're going to see. Well, you can make that request of the organizers and say, I need this accommodation. And they have an obligation to provide the accommodation, right? Whether that's having a live ASL interpreter. I don't know how many of you may have seen some of the videos of ASL interpreters who are at a lot of live concerts. They're kind of off to the side on the stage, and then they interpret all of the music that's happening, which is sometimes entertaining, right? But it's the accommodation that's necessary so that people with disabilities can still meaningfully participate in the activity. So another barrier to programmatic accessibility can be an intellectual impairment. Maybe the language needs to be adjusted to meet the individual's needs. Maybe the individual is reads at a lower reading level, right? So the language just needs to be adjusted. We do that frequently because as a lawyer, we use a lot of really unnecessary big words. So we are frequently running written materials through a readability scanner to determine how we can keep the content, but make the language more accessible to more people. Maybe the individual isn't able to read, right? There's a very high instance of people who aren't able to read in the state of Louisiana. So that would need an accommodation as well, right? Maybe that individual just needs somebody to review the documents with them. Maybe you need someone to help you read through paperwork before you can agree to things. Again, that's something that the providers of services should be asking the individuals with disabilities, but it's also something that the individuals with disabilities should be able to speak up about, right? Should be able to say, I have this need, I need an accommodation, this is what will help me. And it's all about knowing what your rights are, right? So then we think about barriers for individuals who are neurodivergent, right? So this is maybe individuals with autism, diagnosed with autism, or any other variety of neurodivergent diagnosis, right? Individuals might experience a sensory overload. So they might need a quiet space with limited sensory input. Maybe a process needs to be adjusted to meet the individual's needs, right? Maybe as part of an application process, you need to take more breaks, or it needs to be done in a setting that has less bright lights, or less sounds, or less busyness around. Maybe it needs to be in a quieter room. Maybe the person, maybe you just need an emotional support human to sit with you, right? Maybe it's if the individual with a disability would just want somebody else to be present. They don't need to necessarily directly assist, but maybe that person's presence helps, right? Those are all things that are accommodations, and those are all things that should be granted if the individual with a disability um, makes the request, right? So people with disabilities should know you have the right to make those requests. So anytime that you're in a situation or you're going into a setting or you're going into a place and you, as the person with a disability, identify a barrier for yourself, speak up. Speak up and say, this is an issue for me. This is how this can be overcome. This is the assistance that I need. This is the modification that I need. This is the barrier for me. I need help identifying a modification or something, an accommodation in order for me to be able to participate in this activity or program or service or enter this physical space, whatever the case may be. So I wanted to see, I don't know if we're able to do an interactive, if anybody wants to throw it in the Q&A, but I wanted to see if we could get some input from y'all, right? What your observations are. Can you identify one barrier to physical accessibility that you've encountered? Either that you've personally encountered or something that you've observed or just something that you're generally aware of, something that is a barrier to physical accessibility. And I don't know, Rachel, if we're able to see the anything in the Q&A or if there's a chat or anywhere that anybody has shared. I'll give everybody just a minute.
Melanie, can you see the chat, the comment in the chat?
I was just looking for it and no, I can't find the chat.
And
Help.
let me read it out. The first one are tables too close together in a restaurant or racks too close together in a department store.
Yes, that's a good one. That's a very good one. Yeah, because those are common spaces in which people kind of navigate independently on their own. So they should be fully accessible because it's not something that you'd necessarily have somebody walking around with you to be able to say, hey, can you move this? Very good.
Another one is lack of accessible seating in public spaces.
That is a very big one, right? And that's something that frequently comes up as an issue and is sometimes really challenging to be able to address, right? Yeah, very good. Thank you. Any others?
Yeah, we've got a few more. No railing or ramp on stairs to an apartment.
Yep, yep, yep. And the railing is a really big one because that's a very easy fix, right? A railing can be installed anywhere, and there's not even barriers when it's a historical setting to be able to put up a railing because that's just safety, right? The ramp can be more challenging depending on what the situation is, but there should be some alternative, some solution. Very good.
We got two more. So cars parked on the sidewalk or in crosswalks.
That's the worst. That's the worst. Those are the worst situations. I experience that frequently just walking my child in the stroller, right? That people are parked blocking up the sidewalk and then you have to walk all the way into the street to do it, right? So imagine if those individuals, if I was in a wheelchair, right? And the risk and danger, especially in some of these New Orleans streets. Yeah, that's a very good one.
And the last one we have is I've seen automatic door opening buttons at hotels not being functional.
Yes. Yeah, that's also a big one. That should also be a very simple solution because it already exists. They just need to get it fixed, right? I will add to that and take that a step further and point out the elevators in some apartment buildings are inoperable. Particularly problematic when you have individuals who have mobility needs that are living on higher floors. And then they're in a situation that they're not able to actually leave their apartment because they can't get out. There's no elevator. So very good. Thank you for that input. All right, I got one more for you. There we go. What about a barrier to programmatic accessibility? Does anybody have an example of a programmatic accessibility barrier that you've observed, either personally or something that you've been aware of? The physical barriers are always a little easier to identify than the programmatic. Give everybody just a minute. So I'll give you one to get y'all started and to kickstart some of those thoughts. This presentation is actually not programmatically accessible. I have not made the descriptions of images or videos or even myself that you would normally do to make this accessible to individuals with visual impairments to ensure that they're able to um, participate with the full scope of everything that's being presented to people who don't have visual impairments. There's also I'm not here with an interpreter. So we also have a programmatic barrier for people who have hearing impairments. Rachel, do we have others in the chat now?
We did. We had one person write in that said kids with disabilities not allowed to engage in recreation department activities with typical peers.
There you go. That's a great one. That's a great one. And we frequently have requests for assistance that come in around those exact things. Kids with disabilities not being able to go on field trips with their peers because the school doesn't want to be bothered trying to accommodate them, or kids who want to play a sport with their peers and aren't being there's no accommodation that's made available to them to meaningfully participate, or even something simple as like an after school club, right? An after school club has declined to permit an individual with a disability to participate because they didn't want to provide a simple accommodation. So yeah, that's a good one. It's sad, but it's a good one. Any others?
We had one come in going back to your first question. It was on Facebook where there's a little bit of a delay. They mentioned that in places where there's no pedestrian areas in cities.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really big one, right? So when you have, especially in a city, which is, arguably there's a lot more pedestrian traffic than there would be in a rural community, and there's no safe spaces to navigate, whether it's inaccessible sidewalks or no bike paths or no walking paths or whatever the case may be. That is a big issue, and it's something that we've worked to address in the past. We had a case a number of years ago against a city out in the western part of the state that failed to have accessible sidewalks. And it was a very small town, very, very small town. And there were 3 individuals who used wheelchairs who weren't able to safely navigate around the town to go to the grocery store or the library or the bank or the pharmacy or any of the other places they needed to go. And the result was that they had to use their wheelchairs in the road where the cars were. The problem came in because police started to arrest them for unsafely operating wheelchairs in the street with cars. And yet they weren't able to have any other option because the sidewalks weren't accessible. So we stepped in and filed a suit against the city in order for them to move forward with the renovations to make the sidewalks accessible. And in some instances, it was simply repairing broken sidewalks. But that unfortunately continues to be an issue everywhere. Great.
Couple more, school aftercare not able to accommodate children with disabilities.
Yeah. Aftercare is aftercare, daycare, and what's the other one? The one that goes in the morning before school, the before school care. Those are often very difficult to overcome some barriers for accessibility. Yeah.
I think we got 2 more, no read aloud function for digital textbooks for person with visual impairment.
Yep, that's a really good one. That's a really good one. There are And what's funny about that is there are so many options that are currently available that either are no cost or are low cost, and they're just, it's a resource that's just not utilized. Good one.
One more, excessive noise levels in a public space, such as a restaurant or rec center that plays music with no areas with a quieter environment.
That's a very good one. That's a very good one. And one that we've seen in very limited circumstances that there are some spaces that are working towards accommodating that. Even this past year during Mardi Gras, they had sensory areas that they had a couple of blocks that were intended to be quieter. So the parade that rolled through didn't do all of the loud extravagant things that they did on the rest of the route. And it was also signage was up and it was kind of blocked off for parade viewers to be quieter and be, less parade celebrating that they normally are, just to allow individuals with disabilities and with who are neurodivergent. I have a hard time with that word, neurodivergent, to be able to experience the parade and enjoy it. So that's a very good one. Okay, very good. Thank you all for your participation. And thank you, Rachel, for helping. So the last thing that I wanted to just touch on here, and then open it up to questions, is just some resources. So our website, Disability Rights Louisiana, we have resources available on our website, and that resource pool grows all the time as we develop updated resources for different topics. We will share them on our website. We also, through information and referrals, have a ton of resources that are available to individuals with disabilities that we can share or that we can direct you to get assistance for a variety of things. So here's our contact information again, with our phone number, our website, and our online intake form. And with that, we can open it up to questions if there's any questions.
And again, if you have questions, you can post them in the Q&A, in the chat, or on Facebook. Just keep in mind, again, if they're Facebook comments, they will be accessible before and after this presentation. Melanie, I will say we had a comment come through that just said, so informative. Thank you so much for the information. And there is a bit of delay, so if it's okay, we'll just take a minute and wait for questions.
Certainly, certainly.
Melanie, do you mind going to the next slide?
Not at all.
Let's see. So while we wait for questions, please check out our legal help access points to get assistance with your civil legal issues. These access points are physical computers or booths that allow users to access a spectrum of services and information, get customized legal information referrals, see if you qualify for legal aid, schedule meetings with a legal aid attorney, and attend court virtually in participating jurisdictions. Access points are currently in libraries in Lake Providence, Vidalia, and DeRidder. One is in the LaSalle Community Action Association in Harrisonburg. And we just opened up one in the St. Bernard Government Complex in Chalmette. For more information, you can visit the link listed there. Let's see, we do have some questions come through. What funds or resources does your organization utilize to cover overhead operational costs?
Ooh, that's a big question. So our primary source of funding is because we were created by Congress. We have federal authority to do our work, which comes with federal funding. So a very large chunk of the work that we do is funded through those federal dollars. We also have some state grants that fund some of our programs. We have private donors and private funding sources that fund some of our smaller programs. We get a few other grants, and then private donations. We are a nonprofit, so we don't charge any of the clients for any of the services that we provide. So we rely on our grant funders and private donations to be able to continue to provide the services that we provide.
And then Camille, I see that you said you had a question from a patron, but I'm afraid the question didn't come through. So I don't know if you mind trying again. Oh, okay, good. That was the question Camille had too.
Oh, very good.
So let me just check. Again, look on Facebook. See, I think I have a little more information. Melanie, if you don't mind going to the next slide. This is our Find Legal Help page, which we just mentioned. This is easily accessible from the LSBA's homepage. It shows you the full spectrum of legal services available across the state. We want to point out two resources in particular. First is the Civil Legal Navigator. That's an online resource that will walk you step by step through your issue. It will also provide you directed referrals to legal aid information programs, Modest Means Directory, self-help services. I'll let you know that Modest Means Directory is actually a listing of attorneys willing to work at a reduced rate, a flat rate, or maybe prorated rate. It's a great resource. And then there's always Free Legal Answers. That's an online pro bono program where people can ask their civil legal questions and have them be answered by a volunteer attorney. There are income guidelines for Free Legal Answers and the Modest Means Directory, but please check those out. And let's see, we have another question.
Oh, great.
For a patron who lives in Lake Charles, what is the easiest way to access resources?
What kind of resources?
And he said in person specifically.
Resources for us, if or what I don't know what kind of resources.
See, we'll give it one more second. And my
Yeah.
coworker's telling me to mention the DAN network. That is, it's called the Disability Assistance Network to help people find an attorney in their area willing to represent them. Let me go ahead and put that in the chat.
So if the request for resources, I'm not sure what kind of resources were he's looking for. If you're referring to Disability Rights Louisiana resources, the easiest way would be to call us, and then we can talk with you. We have an office in Lafayette, but they're limited in their scope of what staff are present there. So calling us would probably be the easiest. And honestly, if you have questions about a disability specific bucket of resources or a assistance specific type resources, if you give us a call, we'll be able to help kind of better navigate that question to be able to provide you with some clearer information about what resources we could help you with.
Great. And then Melanie, someone was asking if they could receive the PowerPoint. Is that okay to share with them this PowerPoint?
Certainly,
great.
yeah, that's totally fine. I have no problem with that.
So anyone can email me. Let me go ahead and put it in the chat at rachel.mills@lsba.org. My name is spelled actually RACHAEL.mills, MILLS at lsba.org. Let me just check another thing. I know Stephanie's put some information out there as well. And she put my email in the Facebook chat as well. Again, just anyone email me. I'm happy to send out this presentation. But I think we're good with questions. Melanie, thank you so much. It was a really wonderful presentation today. Thank you all who joined us today as well. And again, please, save the date for our next one on disaster prep and contractor fraud. It's on June 17th at 12 noon. You can log in for that, and then the library watch parties as well. So again, everyone, thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and end it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.